Hello and welcome to this talk on the history of St Austin's, which we've recorded as part of Wakefield's Heritage Week celebrations. I'm Dominic Gilroy and I've set myself the task today of trying to cover snippets of the 200-year history of St Austin's Church and Parish through 60 or so images and trying to keep the talk to 30 minutes or less. So without further ado, let's move on. So many people know about Charles Waterton's involvement in the early history of St Austin's Parish. He allowed the Catholics of Wakefield to attend Mass in his chapel at Walton Hall before the church was built, and he also contributed to the finances needed both to build the church and to keep it running. And he attended the church himself along with his servants. Less well known, however, are the characters depicted in the two sketches below. In 1823, they were both co-signatories with Charles on the agreement for the purchase of the land on which St Austin's Church was built. They went on to sign further agreements in 1828. Father William Waterton, on the left, was Charles's younger brother and became a Jesuit priest, being ordained in 1829 and serving in Ireland, Pontefract and at Stonyhurst. Father Thomas Glover, on the right, was a senior Jesuit who had served at Stonyhurst and at Edinburgh before becoming the British representative of the Jesuits in Rome a few years after the building of St Austin's Church. When a Roman Republic was declared in 1849, many senior Catholics had to flee the country, including Thomas, who by now was quite old. He found refuge at Walton Hall with Charles Waterton and died a few months later. He was buried in the Waterton family plot at St Helen's Church. Regular listeners will be familiar with this image, which is one of several by Catholic architect Joseph Ireland. Ireland had close links with Wakefield as his grandfather's brother was the last Lord of the Manor of Crofton in 1745, and Ireland himself had developed a reputation for architecture and specialised in the design of Catholic chapels. The image shows one of his plans for St Austin's Church, which was drawn up in 1824. He envisaged a grand building with columns in a portico entranceway, which can be shown towards the right of this diagram, and a school building is shown behind the church. The final version of the drawing was less grandiose than Ireland had envisaged. This is a plan drawn in 1828 by Father Morris, the first rector of St Austin's, when he moved into the finished building. You can see the entrance is in the same place over on the right, but is far less grand than Ireland's plan. A wash house was built behind the chapel in place of the school. However, in the numbered bullets beneath the plan, Father Morris has written as point 4, under the chapel are schoolrooms. And it is in these rooms that the first lessons of St Austin's School were being held. We don't have an image of the first rector, Father Morris, but here are the second and third rectors of the parish. Father Francis Jarrett on the left was in Wakefield between 1844 and 1854 and was well known for his compassion and hands-on assistance to parishioners. Records show that during a cholera epidemic, he even ventured into the slums of Wakefield to care for a dying man who had no one else to look after him. Under his leadership, the congregation continued to grow, and he petitioned for an assistant priest, a wish which was finally granted in the year before he left, in 1853. In 1854 he was succeeded by Father Barron on the right, who stayed until 1869. One of his major achievements was the establishment of a separate, purpose-built St Austin's school. He also carried out alterations to the church, including the installation of statue niches, which we can see in later photos. And here is the school that was built. In only 6 months, during 1869, the building was put together and supplemented over future years as school numbers grew. Hundreds of the city's children were educated here until the mid-1960s, when it was replaced by the current St Austin's Primary School and St Thomas of Becket's on Barnsley Road. The Sisters of Charity of St Paul were invited to the parish by Father Barron to run the new school. Over 80 women from the order served in the parish from 1859 to the 1950s. Two of those who stayed longest in the city were Sister Alphonsus Joseph Grace on the left, who came to Wakefield after her profession in 1880 and stayed until 1937 when she died, and Sister Gertrude on the right, who served between 1881 and her death in 1906. This is Denby Grange in Overton, on the way from Wakefield to Huddersfield, home at the time to Roland Wilkinson, a Catholic barrister. In 1875, the family gained permission from the bishop for Father Richard Cooper, the rector at St Austin's, to say Mass occasionally in their new chapel dedicated to St Gabriel. In effect, this became the first chapel of ease of St Austin's, serving the Catholics of Middleston and Flockton. A church at Ossett would follow very soon after, within a few months. We often focus on the rectors and parish priests of St Austin's, but there have also been dozens of assistant priests over the years. Father William Thompson on the left was the first to arrive in 1853, as the small mission at Wakefield grew in size and required more than a single priest to serve the parish. Father Edward de Waterville served between 1862 and 1864, shown on the right here. His departure was due at least in part to the disfavour of Bishop Cornthwaite, who described the poor fellow as odd and eccentric. A parish, of course, is nothing without its parishioners, and at St Austin's various groups and fraternities emerged over the years, one of the earliest being the Catholic Young Men's Society, which was founded in 1858 in the parish and celebrated its Golden Jubilee in 1908, with this photo taken in the presbytery garden. The Catholic Young Men's Society was one of several groups who developed sports teams to participate in local and national competitions. The rugby football team, established in around 1880, was well respected across the district and played on Manor Field near the school. Their secretary was John Dixon, seen here on the left, and their club room was in the Griffin pub, then located on the Bullring. They were good enough to take on Wakefield Trinity on several occasions, and many of their members, including Harnell, seen here in the centre, and Burnley on the right, went on to play for Trinity. Rugby was not the only sport played though. This is the Catholic Young Men's Society cricket team, pictured on their field behind Love Lane in around 1900. And much later on in the 1950s, the St Austin's tug of war team became famous throughout the north of England. Moving back to the church itself, the medieval statue of St Anne is one of the treasures of St Austin's Church. It's first mentioned in the church records in the 1920s, but has been dated by experts to be from around the year 1500, when vast numbers of these statues were imported to Britain from the Netherlands. St Austin's Catholic Boys Brigade was founded in January 1913, after the rector, Father O'Gorman, purchased instruments necessary to form their band. The basic army drill training received by the young men and boys meant that when war broke out in 1914, many of their number immediately joined up to fight. Two of the Jesuit army chaplains who served in the war were linked to St Austin's, and both won the Military Cross for their bravery. Father Edmund Legrosse, on the left, was assistant priest in the parish twice, first around 1904 and again around 1920. Father Henry Day, on the right, was a regular in the parish, giving speeches on many occasions and being eventually invited to open the parish war memorial. In addition to the Military Cross, he was also awarded the Order of the White Eagle of Serbia, and he wrote several books on his experiences during the war. He served in the parish as assistant priest between 1922 and 1924. The Calvary War Memorial on Wentworth Terrace outside the church captures the names of 85 men of the parish who died while on service during the war. Over 200 more came home with their memories and battle injuries. Their stories are captured in 2 volumes produced in their honour in the parish. May processions were a popular element of parish life for decades, especially during the 20th century. This image, dated from around the early 1930s, shows Mary Timon as the May Queen. A young Damien Grimes, who would be later ordained, is the rear page boy shown in the picture. The elaborate processions included adorning the church with flowers and crowning the statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary, an honour which was bestowed upon the May Queen, who was selected each year from the schoolgirls at St Austin's School. In 1931, after over 100 years of service, the Jesuit order left the parish, handing control over to the bishop and diocesan priests. Shown here is the last Jesuit rector, Father James Bridge, who is seated in the centre. His assistants left to right are Father Thomas Heaney, Father Patrick Daly and Father Charles Dawson. They were replaced by Canon Charles Latour, seen here seated in the centre, and his colleagues left to right, Father Gerard Kelly, Father Thomas Power standing, and Father Eamon King. Canon Latour had fought ferociously for Catholic education in his previous roles in Hemsworth and Dennerby, earning himself the title Lion of the West Riding in the local press. Perhaps unsurprisingly then, one of his first endeavours in Wakefield was to establish a new school for the developing Lupset estate. The school was dedicated to the soon-to-be canonised Blessed English Martyrs. The parish got its own priest almost immediately, but would have to celebrate Mass in the school until a new church was built some decades later. When Wakefield Council announced a historical pageant was going to be celebrated in the city, the Catholics were keen to be involved and set up a committee to organise episode 2. This episode focused on the defeat of the pagan king Penda, which happened in West Yorkshire, and the story also featured the character of the Abbess Hilda of Whitby. The church interior has undergone many changes over the years, and it's interesting to look at a series of images which illustrate some of these. This earliest image is dated to around 1890, and it features on the banner. Statue niches can be seen on the side walls of the church, and we can also see gas trident lights visible on the side benches. This is a similar image which dates from around 1906 and shows the church in a very similar state. The name plaques from the bench rents are still visible on the backs of the wooden benches. 2 statues have also appeared next to the columns flanking each side of the sanctuary. You may also be able to note the curtains on the top rooms either side of the sanctuary. These were sometimes used by the Sisters of Charity in order to hear Mass. The curtains are slightly ajar and you can see into the light from the rooms behind. This image dates from the 1960s after a major renovation undertaken by Monsignor Thompson. A crucifix has been installed behind the sanctuary on the wall and replaces the former paintings which were previously here. You may also note that gates have been commissioned for the altar rails. The pulpit has been moved from the left-hand side of the church, and much of the elaborate decoration and statues have also been removed. Moving on a few decades more, this image dates from the arrival of Canon Barr to the parish in the late 1980s. Unlike the other images which were pre-Vatican II, we can now see a central altar in place, albeit a very small one. Before long, Canon Barr would undertake a major redecoration and restoration of St Austin's Church in 1990. This image is taken immediately after this redecoration. The sanctuary and altar have been projected forward with steps on either side. Potential accident waiting to happen for many people. The priest's chair has been raised on a small platform to ensure visibility behind the altar. The walls have been painted a salmon pink colour. The tabernacle has been removed to the Lady Chapel in accordance with the trends set by the diocese at the time. Any decoration in the new church is minimal. Although the area isn't visible on this picture, the altar rails and the pulpit, visible on previous pictures, have now been removed. We're almost back to the present day now as we see this image from Father Noonan's era. The familiar Irish green has been applied to the walls and the tabernacle has been restored behind the sanctuary. Extensions have been added to the altar itself and it has been moved back to safety into the main sanctuary area. You may notice there are now statues in the alcoves to either side of the sanctuary, which replace the so-called wine rack decorations formerly in place here. Not all plans hatched by St Austin's rectors and parish priests came to fruition. In 1865, in an effort to address the rising numbers in the congregation, Father Barron had purchased some land on Southgate and had plans drawn up for a new St Austin's church by an architect named George Goldie. This is the image on the left. For various reasons, the plans came to nothing, and the existing church was expanded instead. Almost a century later, Monsignor Thompson was keen to provide easy access to Mass for parishioners in the expanding Eastmoor area of the city. He had plans drawn up for a new Catholic church, but in the end came to an arrangement to share the Anglican Church of St Swithin instead. The plans for Monsignor's church are shown on the right. Some plans, however, were more successful. We have already mentioned Ossett and English martyrs, but here are a few more. On the left is the original St Peter and Paul's Church, built in Portobello as a war memorial in 1926. It was served from St Austin's until the parish became independent in 1954. On the right, from the top to bottom, we see Our Lady of the Wayside in Outwood. This was formerly a Methodist church, purchased and used as a Catholic church between 1970 and 1987. St Joseph Crofton was built in 1926 after several years of Mass having been said in private homes in the village. It became part of St Peter and Paul's parish in 1954. Stanley never had a Catholic church of its own, but Mass was said by priests from St Austin's in various places between 1945 and 1990. The Zion Christian Centre, shown here at the bottom, is one of those places. When we talk about amateur dramatics in the parish, it's often St Austin's players we think of. But this group is just the latest in a long line of dramatic societies produced within the parish. Seen here is the St Austin's Catholic Mask Theatre in the production Man from the Ministry in 1950. We spoke earlier about the Catholic Young Men's Society. In 1958, the parish set up a branch of the Knights of St Columba, and the founding members are shown here after an inaugural Mass held at the old St Peter and Paul's Church. Monsignor Thompson can be seen in the front centre of the picture. Over the years, at least 22 men from the parish have joined the priesthood and religious orders, with many women joining the nuns. Some of the men are shown here, starting with Father John Henry Gilroy, who joined the Holy Ghost Fathers, top left. Two of the Conlon brothers joined the Benedictines, and middle at the top is Father Peter Bennett Conlon, making friends with an owl. On the top right we have Father Bernard Shaw. Father John Conlon is shown bottom left with Father Damien Grimes, while in the centre we have Father Alban Pierce, who joined the Passionists. Last but not least is Father Holmes, who grew up on Wentworth Terrace opposite the church. Over the years, many parishioners have been awarded honours for their ongoing work in the parish and wider afield. On the left here we have Dr. Laurie Burns, who made countless visits to Lourdes over the years, offering his medical skills. He was made a Knight Commander and then a Knight Commander Complacer of the Order of St. Gregory. David Willis, Jean Whelan and Kevin Rafferty all received awards recognising their contribution to education as head teachers of St. Austin's School. We have already mentioned Canon Latour, who was the first parish priest after the Jesuits left in 1931. Here are our other parish priests since then, starting top left with Father Michael Harty, Monsignor Thompson, Canon Barr, and top right, Father Noonan. From the bottom left, we have Father Swindlehurst, Father Wilson, who is now of course Archbishop Wilson, Monsignor Smith, and our current parish priest, Father Sean Crawley. So to bring us right up to date to almost the present day, I thought we would end on this aerial photograph of the church and its surroundings taken by a drone not too many years ago. It's a view that we don't see every day, and some interesting features are visible, including the skylight above the sanctuary. There is a very clear distinction between the church and the original presbytery building, which is now the sanctuary. This can be seen to the left-hand side of the dome of the Lady Chapel. You might also just be able to make out St. Joseph's Bell, which can be seen just to the top of the Lady Chapel dome, the other side of the church roof. So that's all we have time for today. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this short presentation scheduled for Heritage Week 2025. Thanks for taking the time to listen. If you're interested in the history of St. Austin's Church and School, you may want to catch the other YouTube presentations available. You can also read more about the history of St. Austin's School and Church in the books by Dennis McNiff. These are available online through Amazon or through the Church Repository stall. Our next display and presentation will focus on St. Austin's parishioners in the wars. We will look at those who died and also those who survived World War I and World War II. This will be held on Friday the 7th of November from 6:30, with the talk starting at 7 p.m. in St. Austin's Parish Rooms. A recording will be made available on YouTube in the usual way. Thank you again for listening. Goodbye.